Herbert Spencer. For metaphysics had meant, throughout the history of thought, an attempt to discover the ultimate nature of reality. Now men learned, on the most respectable authority, that reality could never be experienced, that it was a noumenon, conceivable but not knowable, and that even the subtlest human intelligence could never pass beyond phenomena, could never pierce the veil of Maya. Science, in the sense of exact knowledge, had spread from one subject matter to another in the order given, and it was natural that the complex phenomena of social life should be the last to yield to scientific method. In each field of thought, the historian of ideas could observe a law of three stages. At first, the subject was conceived in the theological fashion, and all problems were explained by the will of some deity, as when the stars were gods or the chariots of the gods. Later, the same subject reached the metaphysical stage and was explained by metaphysical abstractions, as when the stars moved in circles because circles were the most perfect figure. Finally, the subject was reduced to positive science by precise observation, hypothesis, and experiment, and its phenomena were explained through the regularities of natural cause and effect. The will of God yields to such airy entities as Plato's ideas or Hegel's absolute idea, and these in turn yield to the laws of science. Metaphysics is a stage of arrested development. The time had come, said Kant, to abandon these puerilities. Philosophy was not something different from science. It was the coordination of all the sciences with a view to the improvement of human life. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution, born of a little science, was stimulating science in return. Newton and Herschel had brought the stars to England. Boyle and Davy had opened the treasures of chemistry. Faraday was making the discoveries that would electrify the world. Rumford and Joule were demonstrating the transformability and equivalence of force and the conservation of energy. The sciences were reaching a stage of complexity which would make a bewildered world welcome a synthesis. But above all these intellectual influences that stirred England in the youth of Herbert Spencer was the growth of biology and the doctrine of evolution. Science had been exemplarily international in the development of this doctrine. Kant had spoken of the possibility of apes becoming men. Goethe had written of the metamorphosis of plants. Erasmus Darwin and Lamarck had propounded the theory that species had evolved from simpler forms by the inheritance of the effects of use and disuse. And in 1830, Saint-Hilaire shocked Europe and gladdened old Goethe by almost triumphing against Cuvier in that famous debate on evolution which seemed like another Hernani, another revolt against classic ideas of changeless rules and orders in a changeless world. In the 1850s, evolution was in the air. Spencer expressed the idea, long before Darwin, in an essay on the development hypothesis, 1852, and in his Principles of Psychology, 1855. In 1858, Darwin and Wallace read their famous papers before the Linnean Society, and in 1859 the old world, as the good bishops thought, crashed to pieces with the publication of The Origin of Species. Here was no mere vague notion of evolution, of higher species evolving somehow from lower ones, but a detailed and richly documented theory of the actual mode and process of evolution by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. In one decade, all the world was talking about evolution. What lifted Spencer to the crest of this wave of thought was the clarity of mind which suggested the application of the evolution idea to every field of study, and the range of mind which brought almost all knowledge to pay tribute to his theory. As mathematics had dominated philosophy in the 17th century, giving to the world Descartes, Hobbes, Spinoza, Leibniz, and Pascal, and as psychology had written philosophy in Berkeley and Hume and Condillac and Kant, so in the 19th century, in Schelling and Schopenhauer, in Spencer and Nietzsche and Bergson, biology was the background of philosophic thought. In each case, the epical ideas were the piecemeal production of separate men, more or less obscure, but the ideas are attached to the men who coordinated and clarified them, as the New World took the name of Amerigo Vespucci because he drew a map. Herbert Spencer was the Vespucci of the age of Darwin, and something of its Columbus, too. His secretary tells us that Spencer composed his first book, Social Statics, having read no other ethical treatise than an old and now forgotten book by Jonathan Diamond. He wrote his Psychology after reading only Hume, Mansell, and Reid, his Biology after reading only Carpenter's Comparative Physiology, and not The Origin of Species, his Sociology without reading Comte or Tyler, his Ethics without reading Kant or Mill or any other moralist than Sedgwick. What a contrast to the intensive and relentless education of John Stuart Mill. Where then did he find those myriad facts with which he propped up his 1,000 arguments? He picked them up, for the most part, by direct observation rather than by reading. In 1852, his essay on The Theory of Population, one of the many instances of Malthus's influence on the thought of the 19th century, suggested that the struggle for existence leads to a survival of the fittest, and coined those historic phrases. In the same year, his essay on the development hypothesis met the trite objection that the origin of new species by progressive modification of older ones had never been seen, by pointing out that the same argument told much more strongly against the theory of the special creation of a new species by God. And it went on to show that the development of new species was no more marvelous or incredible than the development of a man from ovum and sperm, or a plant from a seed. In 1855, his second book, The Principles of Psychology, undertook to trace the evolution of mind. Then, in 1857, came an essay on Progress, Its Law and Cause, which took up von Baer's idea of the growth of all living forms from homogeneous beginnings to heterogeneous developments, and lifted it into a general principle of history and progress. In short, Spencer had grown with the spirit of his age, and was ready now to become the philosopher of universal evolution. When in 1858 he was revising his essays for collective publication, he was struck by the unity and sequence of the ideas he had expressed. And the notion came to him, like a burst of sunlight through opened doors, that the theory of evolution might be applied in every science as well as in biology, that it could explain not only species and genera, but planets and strata, social and political history, moral and aesthetic conceptions. He was fired with the thought of a series of works in which he would show the evolution of matter and mind from nebula to man, and from Savage to Shakespeare.